This morning, the forgotten victims of 9/11, former school kids who are getting sick and need the government's help.
Now, from 42nd and 2nd, this is PIX11 News Closeup with Marvin Scott.
Good morning. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 took a devastating toll on our country, and particularly right here in New York City, where the long-term health implications for those exposed to environmental toxins, they're still unfolding. 16 years later, while the dust has settled, the physical ramifications of 9/11 are still with many. Thousands of first responders have developed cancers, respiratory and other illnesses as a result of inhaling the toxic dust. Scores of them have died. The Zadroga Victims Compensation Fund has been established to provide medical assistance. Now, an effort is underway to provide compensation for the forgotten victims of 9/11. Former students, teachers, and people who lived in the area around Ground Zero on that fateful day. Michael Barasch is an advocate for those people. He's an attorney who has represented over 10,000 first responders and survivors sickened after 9/11. He's now representing former teachers and students who are part of an emerging cancer cluster. Most disturbing. Welcome.
Marvin, thank you for having me.
Don't want to sound unnecessarily fearful for anyone, but how much of a threat is this to those kids who were going to school down there?
Okay, well, it's, as you said, it's not just the kids, but that seems to have gotten everyone's attention. I hate to say it, because I do represent the vast majority of my clients are firefighters and police officers, but the Zadroga Health and Compensation Act, which was passed by Congress, is for downtown residents and office workers also. It's for teachers and for students. And guess what? They were breathing the same toxic dust as the first responders. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that 16 years later, we're seeing them come down with the same exact illnesses. You ask me, you told me you don't want to be an alarmist. Well, I wish I had great news, but I don't. I was fortunate enough and honored to represent Detective Jimmy Zadroga, for whom the bill was named. And when
he was the first one for whom they found evidence that it was linked to his cancer.
He had pulmonary fibrosis, which is just an awful respiratory illness. You basically suffocate to death. I'll never forget him in my office. He was 34 years old with his 4-year-old daughter, Tyler Ann. And Tyler Ann was changing his oxygen tank because Jimmy was too weak to do it himself. And so he died, and when he died, they did an autopsy of his lungs out in New Jersey. And in his lung tissue, they found ground glass.
Jet fuel.
Benzene, asbestos, chromium, lead. You've done your homework, yes. And it's clear that the kids at Stuyvesant High School and the other 12 public schools that were south of Canal Street, they were breathing the same dust.
But they were also several blocks north of Ground Zero. They were not on the pile. They were not there that day. They were there where the toxic cloud was filtering.
Right. Well, that was when it was at its most potent, according to the doctors and the scientists. And then they also came back to school. They came back to work. They came back to their homes at Battery Park. There were, I think the statistics are, there were 25,000 people living south of Canal Street on 9/11. There were 325,000 people working in downtown Manhattan. All those people were exposed to the same dust. And as you know, the buildings were on fire for 99 days. So if the wind on any particular day was blowing in your direction, you were inhaling that dust.
Now, what evidence have you received that these former students and the teachers have been impacted, that the illnesses that are now developing are actually linked to that dust from 9/11?
Well, I'm a juris doctor, not a real doctor, but the doctors at the Bureau of Health Services for the fire department, the doctors in NIOSH, they kept meticulous statistics of how many firefighters got sick before 9/11, had these particular illnesses. And we are now seeing statistical evidence to support the conclusion that 68 cancers have been linked to the toxic dust because they're elevated 25%. which according to the medical community is incredibly significant.
Now, there have been a number of deaths among those first responders.
Yeah,
police
sadly.
officers, firefighters. You gave me a figure that over 1,700 people have been diagnosed with cancer who were there.
Over 1,700 firefighters have been diagnosed with cancer alone. We know that over 5,000 people in the World Trade Center health program have been certified for cancer. I mean, the statistics are alarming, but I fear this is just the tip of the iceberg.
And you gave me a figure of 164 firefighters.
164
have passed on.
firefighters have had their deaths officially linked to the toxic inhalation.
And police officers?
Oh, police officers, well, there are many more police officers than firefighters, but I'm sure the number is about the same. Over 150 police officers have died since 9/11 as a result of their cancers.
Now, there were about 12 schools in that area.
12 public schools. There was also Pace University and BMK. Yeah, there were other schools and technical schools as well.
Now, what types of cancer are you finding now that these students and teachers have been exposed to?
Well, think about it, Marvin. You were inhaling the toxic dust, or you were exposed because, as a matter of fact, the number one cancer is skin cancer. And that makes sense because they analyzed the pH level of the toxins, and it was akin to Drano.
Oh my goodness.
So the weather was beautiful that September. People were walking around in short sleeves and shorts, and they're being exposed to this dust. They're returning to the classrooms, and they're exposed to the dust there. So skin cancer is elevated 25%, basal cell and squamous cell and melanomas. But we're also seeing esophageal cancer, lung cancer, kidney cancer, breast cancer, and for the men, prostate cancer. Those are the most common cancers that are being reported by the health program.
Plus the chronic respiratory disease.
Well, that's right. So asthma, rhinitis, sinusitis, GERD, which is also called reflux, COPD, and sleep apnea are all the most common of the respiratory ailments.
Let's talk about these forgotten victims, the former students and the teachers. Some of these cancers are not typical for people of their age.
Oh, 25-year-old women should not have breast cancer. 26-year-old men should not have thyroid cancer, colon cancer, bladder cancer. And it's heartbreaking.
Now, Michael, your challenge right now is reaching out to the people who should be monitored. There is a monitor program that they should go out and be checked. You're talking about tens of thousands of people who are living down there, not only these students and the teachers.
So thank you for pointing it out. That is the reason that I'm doing this outreach right now, and I appreciate WPIX and your show shining a light on this. When the Health and Compensation Act was passed, it created both the health program and the Compensation Act. And as a matter of fact, for you to be eligible for compensation, you have to go through the health program to have your illness certified. So if you were south of Houston Street and in some parts of Western Brooklyn where the plume went over, you're entitled to free medical monitoring and health care if you have a certified illness. If you were south of Canal Street, you're entitled to compensation for a certified illness.
Again, I said at the outset, we don't want to be alarmist, but people out there, what advice do you have for them right now if they live south of Houston or
south of Canal Street?
Canal Street.
Register with the health program. So I mentioned earlier that the World Trade Center or the 9/11 community is approximately 400,000 if you include the first responders. Only 80,000 people so far have registered with the health program to go for monitoring, and they're entitled to annual free monitoring.
Now, Michael, something I read in monitoring, these are specialists who are looking for ailments as a result of that toxic, that poisonous dust, that your regular physician is not the person to see. Is that
Well, your
correct?
regular physician might very well be competent and able to diagnose something, but they may not be looking as carefully. For instance, I've been urged by the doctors at the Bureau of Health Services at the FDNY, Michael, please send all your firefighters for annual skin checkups because it's normally not part of their usual exam. So one of my clients, a firefighter in Brooklyn, he went for an annual exam, and the doctor, when he told the doctor all about his exposure, his doctor noticed something funny underneath the nail of his pinky. Sure enough, it turned out to be a melanoma. They ended up amputating the tip of his pinky, and he's going to live. But he wouldn't have thought to go unless he had heard me speaking, unless the doctors at BHS had told me to spread the word, which is why I'm telling your viewers, go get yourself checked out.
Do you have a helpline?
There is, well, you can always go on my website, of course, and there's so much information. We will register you on the health program for free. We're so passionate about that.
But is there some line on some website
There
or
is.
phone?
There is, and you want me to give it to you now?
Please.
888-847-8786, and they can register with the health program. There's also, they can go on Google World Trade Center Health Program to download a registration form, or they can go to my website, which is WTClawyers.com, and they can find a host of information on there.
All right, give us that 888 number again.
Well, I will do that at the end because I want to make sure that it's an accurate number. But I can't urge you and your viewers how strong this is. So many young people. What's sad is, I was telling you this before we started, everybody knows about the firefighters and the police officers who are coming down with the cancers. But people get tired of hearing the same stories. Not that they're not sympathetic, but it's like, oh, another firefighter passes away or another police officer passes away. Not a day goes by in my office without someone calling me with a 9/11 related cancer. Not a week goes by without one of my clients dying. I mean, my firm alone represents 500 people who have now died and over 2,000 people with cancers. The Victim Compensation Fund has now given away over $3 billion to 14,000 sick people. So not that your viewers should need a kick in the ass to go see a doctor, but this is an economic reason to go.
Should be a wake-up call.
It's a wake-up call, and the government is doing the right thing by providing this compensation and free health care.
All right, Michael, I think in this past few moments we're giving the folks an opportunity to get a pen and write this down. The number again?
888-876-4748.
Okay.
That's for the health program.
Okay, and I think the key to it is early detection certainly can make a difference.
You're so right.
Michael Barasch, thank you very much.
Thank you again, Marvin.
We're going to take a break.